Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of CleanTechies, the podcast. This is season 2, episode 10. We've had a couple weeks off. Been a pretty crazy couple weeks for me, moving back to New York, and got quite sick actually one of these weeks, so I was out of it. Appreciate your patience. But yeah, we're back with the pod. This is episode 22 if you're counting from the beginning. Before we get started, please do subscribe, tap the bell to be notified, and review the show on Apple Podcasts if that's where you watch. Listen, and definitely leave any comments you find interesting throughout the show. If you're watching on YouTube, feel free to reach out to me as well with any other thoughts along the way. A quick reminder that this show is sponsored and made possible by Next Wave Partners. Next Wave Partners is passionate about working with people and organizations to drive the transition towards a sustainable and innovative future. Next Wave Partners creates opportunities and shapes markets globally by providing elite human capital solutions. So if you are looking to grow your team or take the next step in your career, please reach out to Next Wave. You can do so a couple different ways. You can go through their website, which is next-wavepartners.com. That's next-wavepartners.com, and find one of their consultants who is in your region and reach out to them directly or through LinkedIn. And you can also email info@next-wavepartners.com. So there's a couple ways you can reach out to them. We also do have a new sponsor starting today. We have Tigo Energy, which we will be hearing more about them towards the end of the show. But with that, let's get into the details of today's episode. Today's episode is with Tristan Pollock, the founding partner at Cool Climate Collective, which is a syndicate that is investing in climate tech companies and allowing entry-level investors to basically lower the barrier for entry so that they can build a diverse portfolio. Oftentimes, angel investors are kind of stricken with the idea of possibly tossing a few grand in, or 10 to 20 grand into an opportunity where they might not be able to kind of hedge their bets with other opportunities. So I think that this is an interesting kind of take that they're looking at doing here within the space. A very, very interesting conversation that we have with Tristan. He's somebody I've been in contact with for a while. So very excited to have this conversation and to share it with you. So with that, let's get into the show. All right, welcome to the show, Tristan. How's it going today?
Good. Thanks for having me, Salas.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure. I'm very excited for this episode. Obviously, we've talked in the past, but some pretty exciting things you're doing here. So why don't you just kind of give yourself an intro and some of your accomplishments, and then we'll get into kind of how you got to where you are.
Of course. So I'm calling in. I know everyone likes to share their location at the beginning of Zoom calls these days. So I'm calling in from sunny Minneapolis, Minnesota. But I spent most of the last decade in San Francisco. Starting companies, sold a couple companies, and then moved into VC with one of our investors. And then I basically invested about 30 million into 200 plus startups. About maybe 12, 15 of those were more on the climate side. And that's kind of our conversation today. And then more recently, I've been spending time both trying to figure out how to pull money from a lot of the Silicon Valley, climate motivated operators and investors that I know and my partner Mehrad knows, and then bring that into the climate space and help to accelerate climate solutions by getting more novel ideas to market faster. So early pre-seed seed is where we've been investing right now through an entity called the Cool Climate Collective. It's kind of a community-driven angel syndicate where we not only have investors and an LP network that are looking at the climate deals we bring to them, but also mentors that have been operational at places like Tesla or Stripe Climate, as well as many other of the big tech companies in Silicon Valley. And then we're trying to take all that energy and put it into some of these up and coming founders. Not all that are like inexperienced. A lot have had a great track record. And now they're trying to do something climate because they see this, as we do, the biggest challenge of the next decade and probably of our lifetimes. And I always like to say, if you thought COVID was bad over, 1, 2, 3 years, look at the next, 1, 2, 3 decades, and that's climate. And it affects every single opportunity out there, every single industry sector. And that starts to give you an idea of how big this is as far as an investment opportunity, but also as an impact opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is. It is. I don't think it can be understated, really, how tough we this is that we're facing. I'm curious to know a little bit more of the nuances too on how, how did you end up founding Cool Climate Collective? I just want to know kind of, obviously you had the interest there, but what did it take to do this? I know that we talked before, and this wasn't, at least to my knowledge, kind of something you were working on. So I'm just curious to know how this came about, and maybe a little bit of the background there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, I'm a founder that plays really well with others. So I met Mehrad in the Terra ClimateTech VC fellowship that we both did this summer, and just hit it off. We both wanted to do something like this, and kind of re-energize angel list and syndicates and investing and like our own like investment. We had both done angel investing and I had done some VC, but it hadn't been as focused. It was more just generalist tech. And so we were looking at, well, what if we played this generalist climate tech card and we look at early stage and we try to get more involved? And it just kind of worked out. I think I love Mehrad, amazing person. He's got a little bit deeper connections into some of the climate sectors, the scientists, the researchers. I kind of come with the more traditional startup tech, Silicon Valley, San Francisco experience. And we just worked really well together. It just kind of happened. And I think over a matter of a few months, we scaled up to like 250,000 LPs. And we've now at this point, I think we've have 3 deals that are pretty much closing and another 2 that are live. And so it's like we did a lot in a short period of time. And I think it was just sometimes a lot of things, a lot of startups, timing is everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's timing is right. It's something that, kind of being a newcomer to the space, I sometimes feel like I'm missing out, trying my best to get in there. But I'm curious, what does the process look like to set up a syndicate? And could you maybe explain to people? I'm not highly familiar with the syndicate, so maybe it'd be helpful just to kind of explain a little bit more of that, and how it looks to set that up. Is it really difficult? Just want to know some of those questions too, or know those answers.
Yeah, of course. So I think AngelList is it's really ahead of their time, ahead of like the VC world, where they saw that there was an opportunity to democratize and streamline investment into startups. And actually, way back in the day, my last venture back startup, we actually used this tool called Invest Online that doesn't really exist in the same form anymore, where we just raise money directly from angels on AngelList. And that was kind of pre-syndicates. But then syndicates were kind of the next investment tool that really blew up. And what syndicates are is, you have like a syndicate lead, and you bring investors that trust you, the companies you bring, the deal flow you bring to them. And you basically get an allocation from a startup saying that's raising funding, saying like, let's say like in our case, we're doing, right now the last 100K of a startup's round. And so you get that allocation, and then you basically pitch it to your LP base, your investors, the investors in the syndicate, and they can opt in, opt out on a deal by deal basis.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit more manual than, let's say, a traditional fund, but I think the big difference is traditional fund. Maybe it could take some people like 12 to 18 months to raise a fund if successful, and you may not be doing a lot of investing in that period. Whereas like a syndicate allows you to kind of get off the ground running very quickly, and as long as you can gather up some people, you might be doing smaller check sizes. So I think maybe another big stipulation is like, if you're investing in a small VC fund, there's probably a minimum that a lot of angel investors are not going to do, whether that's 100K or 200K, or even investing direct into a startup, that might be a 25K minimum. But on an AngelList syndicate, a lot of times people are doing $1,000 investment, 5,000, 10,000. So those are a lot more common. Mm-hmm. And thus, so it's kind of like opened it up to allow people to build bigger portfolios, which I think is good, because if you have like 30 to 50 bets on different startups, I think that gives you a lot better chance in, in a high risky world that you'll like one of
Mm-hmm.
these will take off. And then that's the same philosophy as like a traditional VC, right? They think like one, two, three of their startups are going to become this like, multi-billion-dollar unicorn. And when that happens, that returns that whole fund, so that, they're making those 50 to 100 bets, and then one brings it back, so to speak. So it kind of allowed for some of those dynamics to happen, these network effects to happen within AngelList and for a syndicate, for someone who's motivated. And then, what's our benefit? It's like, well, we're not making a salary off of running a syndicate. And even like someone, running a small venture fund isn't really making much of a salary, even off management fees. If you're doing like a 2 and 20, which is like a 2% management fees. And so in that sense, you're you're in a good position to be able to like just kind of like be really like quick and dirty with like getting some of these companies funding, and like and kind of cut your chops at like running a fund. So it's like a really nice. And now I could go on and on, but there's like so many other now new channels with AngelList and different ways that they're like building up to like on top of syndicates that are really interesting.
Yeah, to me that seems interesting, the idea, because obviously, like you mentioned, it's a little bit more manual and maybe takes a little bit extra time in that part of the deal, but in the long term, it's actually shorter. You can get the money to the company sooner. I also really like that it kind of makes the access to these opportunities for investors a lot better, right? You don't have to be somebody who can write or wants to write $25,000, $50,000 checks, right? So I think that's interesting. I'm curious. What do you guys do differently that other companies are doing, or what are you seeing just kind of in the climate tech investment space? Obviously, there's been a lot of money going into climate tech startups in the past 2 years here. I'm just curious if there's some things that you do differently and kind of what your mentality is, and what you guys look for when you're looking to invest.
Yeah. So I think number one, we're looking at the founder, right? We're coming in at an early stage. Sometimes there is a lead VC involved. Sometimes there isn't. Maybe there's an accelerator program. Maybe there's some angels. There's probably some level of co-investment, but we're coming in early enough that we're doing some of this diligence on our own. We're taking a bet on what the founder, what do we feel like they can do this? Do they feel like they're knowledgeable enough? Do they feel like they've been shown that they can execute? Have they done it in the past? And honestly, that's like the number one thing, right? Do we believe in this person? And so anytime that we're syndicating someone, it's like we obviously believe in not just the idea and the differentiation and the market size and some of those things that an analyst could look at, but we believe in the person and the ability. And sometimes that's based on track record. Sometimes that's based on, I've seen thousands and thousands of, founders pitch in decks, and like, I've done like, accelerator cohort vetting and seen how these founders operate once that like they come into the program, and like how do they do for the next 4 months
Hmm.
with 500 startups. And so I've seen a lot of that, and I think I think that's something that a lot of VCs actually don't always get, is that, a lot of checks written to startups are pretty hands off, and you don't have a ton of interaction with the startup. When they're working out of your office every day for 4 months, that gives you a pretty good gauge on like, hey, was that investment what you thought it would be? Are they performing the same way they pitched? And so using some of those kind of like pattern recognition things, and also just like looking at people that I believe in, that I think are like strong leaders. I think that's kind of like the number one thing, in addition to just what the model is and why this is different and how this, reduces climate emissions as it scales.
Yeah, this is something interesting to me because I think, um, and maybe you have some perspective with working with your partner on this, that the types of founders that are going to be found in climate tech companies are typically, I would assume that there's going to be a mixed bag of probably some people who are very interested in actually solving climate change, but there's people who are probably just jumping on the bandwagon. So how do you maybe kind of sort between, I guess, really I'm trying to understand what does a good founder look like versus a bad founder? Like how can you weed those the difference out between them?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I guess like, beyond just seeing it so many times, It's not always like, crystal clear, but I think it's indicative in like how they answer questions, how they like, how they think about things. Are they thinking about things in like a big opportunity way? It's a lot of kind of just like gut checking on what, and I think a lot of VCs do this too, right? Like are they thinking like about scaling this in a big way? Are they going to give up if it gets hard? Like Adam Draper at Boost VC talks about the cockroaches, right? Like, companies that will like survive no matter what, because they believe so much in this solution, this product, and they'll keep surviving to bring it to market and bring it somewhere. And so I think I look for a little bit of that, like a little bit of this like intellectual thought process, and a little bit of vision, and where it could go, and then also some grit, and like they're going to they can figure out, and they've had challenges, and some candor where they can figure out, admit like, hey, this was a problem, but we were able to figure this out and keep going. So I think it's a combination of those things. And then obviously the business, has to fit a certain thesis too, right, for us. So, they have to be doing some sort of mitigation of emissions, whether that's, reducing CO2 or methane, or they're even, and there could be some circular economy piece. Like, I think we're definitely climate generalists. We're like looking at all different aspects, and we have everything from like, one of our investments is a kelp, synthetic kelp, that helps with animal feed. And so, we've had another one that's like a future of sanitation, like above ground sanitation as a circular economy, like fertilizer revenue track, like built into it. And so we're like seeing a lot of these interesting deals. And, but I think it all starts with the founder and kind of how they're able to communicate their idea, the partners and the employees and the team that they're able to build around it, the differentiation they have. And just, I think you're always taking clues and from all those different aspects to see like, do you believe, I think that's at an early stage like this, it's kind of like, do you believe?
Yeah, that's curious, because I think that from what I've heard from other people, the ClimateTech side of things it's less about just the founders, because you can change the technology, right? With tech investing, if you need to, you can adjust the product to fit the market, right? But in this case, it's not just the founders. You have to make sure that they can actually achieve a product and a technology that through the engineering and research and development actually works and actually solves something. So I feel like that's an interesting probably thing to balance.
Yeah. I think that's where Mehrad comes in more so, is he's a little bit deeper into like the climate and science side of it. So that's where we make like a good partnership, I think, because he'll look at some of these things that are coming out of, his various sources that are, heavy, like, synthetic kelp, like super interesting there. And like, we'll plug in different, academics or researchers we know and get some feedback on that. We'll review some of their own research on what they think is, how this looks, how it scales. And so we'll kind of like, do a 1-2 punch on looking at both of those pieces, right? Like understanding the founder and like the ability, and then also like understanding like, is the science like realistic? But I think at the end of the day too, it's like, there's a heavy amount of trust that you're putting in the founder. So it's really like, do you trust them, after like having, these like 1, 2, 3 meetings, looking at the deck, looking at the research, despite it all, right, there's still a lot of hypothesis that needs to be proven.
Yeah, to me, yeah, that makes sense. Another thing I'm curious about is, kind of on a broader topic, still on the broad topic of the money going into the startups. What are your thoughts on the best and fastest way to get money into these startups? Because I know that I've heard different people talk about, we're not interested in investing in companies that are still in research and development phase. I know that there's likely so many solutions that have not even been invented yet. So I'm curious what your take is on at what stage will it be pre-proven concept? Do you think that the government and incentives can play a role with regulation to help advance this? Because obviously you mentioned it's a big problem and we need to make things happen quickly. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what the fastest way to do that is.
Yeah. And obviously there's some there's some tailwinds as far as societal culture, investment, the 5x amount of investment from VC going into climate over any other sector. So there's a lot of interesting pieces there, like you said too, like just huge numbers. And I think like 20 billion last year invested into climate. So just from like the VC side. So I think there's like a variety of different types of institutions that you need. You need people to play at all levels. And this is what sometimes, kind of pre-COVID, like globalization, the internet, like you had breakdowns in certain countries or cities where you didn't maybe you had some people investing at like a, Series C level, but no one doing seed or like no one doing A. And so it was like really difficult to get to those places. So people were more used to bootstrapping, let's say in like Australia versus like in Silicon Valley, where they're like, okay, we can like go raise money, during the .com boom with like barely any, traction or anything at all. And so I think there's like that need to have, you need people at the early stage, you need people, pre-seed, angel, research, and enough of that money so that those can get off the ground. And then that, I think you have more of the mainstream VC world that maybe plays more at like this like seed, Series A and up level. And then you also have like a lot of these like big firms like Tiger Global coming all the way down to seed. So like there's also some dynamics that play in the VC in general, where it's like, this frothy market that VCs are like trying to come earlier and get in at these lower valuations and start like playing in that way. And so there's kind of that, the greater VC realm that's happening and the changes that are happening over the last couple of years. And the, like raising over Zoom, like sort of situation that works for both like founders and for VCs, right? Like they're both like fundraising over Zoom and like able to do a lot faster than they have in the past. And so faster, been able to raise more money. And so that's like spreading, I think, they're trying more stages. So inevitably, I guess the long and short of it is like you need people to be able to play at these like earlier levels, like you said, like research and development levels. And that'll work for some, investors, and others it won't. But I think as we see, we have to kind of always keep an eye on like where the money is flowing and where it's getting, where's the bottleneck when it comes to this, climate in particular, because like we can't afford to allow a bottleneck to sit for too long. And we do need a lot of new ideas, like you said, to come to market quickly and then to be scaled. And so I kind of see those three as like these essential parts of the puzzle, and we needing an adequate amount of funding for each of those.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see if there's going to be any type of, I know that there's some government programs that help with R&D projects, but I'm curious to see if there's going to be more emphasis put on that, right? Because it's almost, I know a lot of people are, especially, I don't know, a lot of, probably a lot of people in the venture world, I'm not quite sure on this, would be against, government spending into these things. But I think that because the risk is higher, right, of low reward, but yet our risk of not solving these issues is also super high. It's almost arguable that the government should be definitely putting money into this. Maybe there's even a venture, maybe it's run. I think Tom Rand talked about this in his book, where it'd be government money but run by a separate entity that is aiming for returns, right? I think that would be interesting to see if that rolls out at some point.
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing grants from like the Department of Energy, and I think more and more grants opening up. There's also like universities that are funding some of these like early stage research pieces. So yeah, there's definitely more happening there. And I think what you'll see is like, you can imagine like how quickly things could change is that there's this top-down regulation that all of a sudden says, hey, you need to start tracking your carbon footprint. It needs to be like factored into everything you do. And that cost, whether it's, you have to like manage the waste that you're putting out, or you have to manage your emissions, and there's going to be a cost to that, like the carbon tax in some way. How a sweeping legislation like that in any country will all of a sudden change the face of business. And so I think if you take any indication from the big tech companies, and how they're already preparing for their 2030 goals, then I think that those sorts of regulations are going to happen, and it's just a matter of time. So like they're already like preempting what's inevitable.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's definitely going to happen. From the people I've spoken to in the kind of the ESG space so far, it seems as though it's maybe a little further off than we'd like it to be, but I definitely like the idea of the carbon tax because then it can be reinvested into these new products, right? While people are still emitting, and then or new research and development, and then it incentivizes companies obviously to get off of that very quickly. So
Mhm.
that'll be interesting to see. One other thing, kind of more on your level is, what are some of the values that you're providing after a check is written? I know that there's obviously, I think it's kind of almost a shifting dynamic, if I can understand properly, that there's a lot of money going into the space right now. So maybe it's almost on the fund side to try to see how can we get more people to come to us, right? How can we make a name for us that we're going to provide more value? So what are those things that you're doing post writing the check that help provide value to grow that company?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we're still figuring it out. We're still early. We're like just about to close on our first investment, and so I think there's a lot to kind of be discovered there. But I think what we want to do and what we envision is that every founder has challenges, and they're either their like go to market challenges, or their scale challenges, or their fundraising challenges. And so we want to be that, as much as we can, be a real partner in these founders' lives where, and what we've done already is like, we'll make introductions to other co-investors, or, we'll introduce them to someone. They have a certain challenge. Let's say one company we're working with that we're thinking about syndicating and we haven't yet, and they're looking at like retail wholesale channels, and so we introduced them some in our network who have been doing some things like this for a kind of like impact focused company. So it's like, I think it's a lot on like the connections and the support, and making sure that they have the best investors and people at the table, mentors and advisors as well. And so that's kind of, I guess, the vision of it is like being a true collective, and having our LPs who have had some amazing experience, as well as our networks of people that maybe they aren't investing, but like they want to get more involved, and like finding ways to like draw those lines and those connections to the founders that we're working with. That's kind of the vision, and we're just kind of getting started on it right now, but we've already kind of hit the first steps.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think obviously it is a matter of kind of sussing it out as you go, so that's helpful. What have been some of the biggest challenges that you've run into so far? I know you've only been doing this, kind of just like half year, it sounds like, but what have been the biggest challenges so far?
Yeah, I think we have a ton of deal flow, and so managing the amount of deal flow we have is that's a challenge in itself. But then also like trying to keep up with, like, when we see so many good opportunities, and being able to try to syndicate that with just two people. I think that's also been so I think that's been like the bottleneck, and the biggest challenge is, one, like we just need more, and we need more and more investors to come into the space and help these companies, get things going. And then two, we also, like, because we're seeing the amount of deal flow out there, and so I think like that's actually probably the biggest challenge, is just like finding the right people that are climate motivated, that care about making climate impact, as well as making returns, and investing in climate. They have that common belief, and being able to draw those lines, make those connections between the founders that we're meeting with.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about some of the biggest surprises that you've come up against?
Hmm. I think probably one of the surprises, and also a challenge, is just seeing such a wide variety of types of companies, from fintech to consumer to, biotech. We see a wide variety of different types of companies. And so I think another way we've been starting to, think about this is like, how can we be more collaborative and pull people in? And one thing we were discussing was creating this idea of a climate DAO, or a decentralized autonomous organization. The DAOs are starting to become more popular in the crypto world. And we wanted to say like, all right, well, how do we, funnel crypto dollars into climate, but also like reward people for what they're doing? And, whether that's someone who brings deal flow or somebody who helps with the diligence. And so like, that could be carry or a tokenized community. So that's one thing that's we've been kind of playing around with, and like kind of naturally, maybe as also a surprise, because we're like, this is kind of a crazy idea, but I think it could really work in a space like this, and being able to like, not just like ask people for favors, but to truly give them stake in the game every time that they really, support one of these companies.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think that's obviously a tough one, right? Because it's a syndicate, so you have to make sure where everybody's proper investor, et cetera. So that's interesting. Um, what about? I'm really curious to see your perspective on, because you invested in tech, right? You came up through that route, so you've seen kind of the traditional tech investing. What is very different to you in climate tech investing, or what do you see as changing in the near future, kind of with the entire landscape of how investments are being made into these technologies, or maybe just specifically in this space? What's different?
Yeah. I think I've kind of, coming into climate, I've done like a full circle in my career over the last 10 years, where I started out in this kind of like area between tech and impact, and was like doing this social impact media network. And then like, that's how I got into my next startup, which was more kind of like urban innovation and creative economy. And so it's like now kind of like brought me fully back to like the more the impact side. And I think we've seen like some crazy changes in that world since, where impact investing has become more of almost like, looks like VC investing sometimes. Impact investors investing in startups in developing countries, because they scale fast, they hire a ton of people, they change and improve daily life. And so I think that's one thing that's been really exciting. And then we've also, obviously, like the big question has always been like the clean tech 1.0 to like clean tech 2.0, and like climate tech today. And I think that's also like, been like a huge change, with renewables getting so much cheaper, and now like they're the best, cheapest option. And so I think we've seen like quite a bit of those things happen. And kind of like you said, I think I'm seeing, probably because my like background is, I'm seeing like a lot of like software scalable businesses, whether it's e-commerce, whether it's fintech, whether it's SaaS or data. But like, I think at the same time, there's like this whole new emergence of like biotech, and that kind of, because of COVID, that was a huge driver, but also there's a lot of like the natural world that like, these carbon sinks, like in the ocean, carbon sinks in like deserts, like a lot of all these crazy ideas that are like coming out of like how we could use nature to like heal nature. And so I think that's probably one of the big differences, is I did not look at as like at as much biotech stuff, or like true play, like kind of academic research pieces that were coming out of universities. And I think this kind of been an interesting time to get more exposed to that world and support some really like young, really intelligent folks that are coming out of universities with amazing research, and now they just want to bring it to market. And so I think it's kind of the big difference in climate has been between climate and tech, is that there's just been way more of a bridge between, I think, academia and go to market, tech scalability.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense, given the space and the requirement for the science to be right. That's interesting. Um, I mean, you probably see lots of crazy things, but what are some of the biggest things that you see, or biggest areas you see for growth within the next, 1, 5, or 10 years within climate tech space, right? I know there's a lot of things, and I know we talk about in the space a lot. There's no silver bullet. There's going to be several solutions that altogether will create the real solution. But what are some of the biggest areas you see for growth in the really near term?
Yeah, 100%, right? It's definitely a very collaborative future, where we need a little bit of everything to make things work. And I think that I'm kind of aligned with Stripe Climate in this sense, where they're putting all their bets and trying to encourage more carbon removal ideas. YC's had a thesis around this, with what if we had genetically modified phytoplankton in the middle of the ocean where nothing else is really growing, but we give them the right nutrients, and that becomes like this big carbon sink in a place that like no one really is. And I think Stripe Climate's maybe funded like 30 plus of these kind of carbon removal solutions, whether it's kelp forests or it's like direct air capture. So I don't know, as like a technologist, I think I'm really excited by that aspect of like, what can we do with technology that will expedite the problem that we're having, which is too much emissions. And so if direct air capture or something else can have a profound effect on sucking CO2 out of the air in some way, shape, or form, then I feel like that puts us at a much greater chance we're able to prevent some of the, catastrophic outcomes that, otherwise we wouldn't be able to, because there's just too much emissions in the air that are sitting in the air that are going to keep going into the air, even as we ramp down and have a negative trajectory, which we don't yet, that we need some of these removal options. So I think I'm pretty interested in like what will come out of that, and what can we turn air into, right? Like there's Aether, that diamond company, they like suck CO2 out and turn it into diamonds. There's Prometheus Fuels that's like using, I think they want to use, CO2 put it into fuel. And so I think there's some really novel ideas out there that need to be proven, need to be scaled, and also some to come that we haven't seen yet.
Yeah, I think that that's an interesting point. I know there's a lot of people I've seen just talk about, oh, removal isn't feasible. We need to just, stop creating the emissions. But I think that for me, as not a scientist, I think it doesn't make sense that there's ever going to be a way we can completely reduce all emissions, right? So we're going to have something that the cost of the emissions that it costs to make it will actually be outweighed by the negative impact it can make by pulling the carbon out. So that's interesting to hear. I was not familiar
Definitely
with
need both.
these. Yeah, definitely. That's interesting. I guess just a couple other things to maybe kind of wrap up here. What would you say what do you see happening in the education space to fill the gaps of all these roles? Obviously, as a recruiter, I see lots of talent gaps. I'm just curious if you see from the universities, if you're working with the universities at all. I know you mentioned the fellowship you're in. How is all of this new technology, these new roles that have never even been dreamt of really 5 years ago, how is the flow of talent going to be filled by universities and just education in general? How are we making that happen?
Yeah. Well, I think a program like Terra for climate and different types of climate careers, they have ClimateTech careers that maybe are more focused on people getting into like the ESG realm of their company, or they also have like a circular economy program. And, like I took the VC program so they have, I think like some of these like cohort learning programs are ramping up and becoming very useful and helpful to get people fully informed and to also like help them make career changes. And so that's been exciting because like even like beyond Terra, there's On Deck that has a ClimateTech program. And there's a bunch of other like channels like that and opportunities. So I think one, it's like these sorts of programs in addition to, anything that is occurring at a university level. So it's allowing people to not just like come up and start in climate, but also make parallel or horizontal moves from their career in tech to like a career in climate, or from their career in tech to like a climate company, founding a climate company, and things like this. And then I think just like mentorship is really important. That's a big part of why like I'm building this list of like mentors that maybe aren't all in, have a climate background, but just people that know different aspects of business that are willing to help climate founders. Because I think at the end of the day, right, like everyone comes with their own set of skills and experiences, and they need that mentorship. And that's like pretty much true across any sort of startup or company experience. And so I think all those different types of education are playing together and like helping people make these like transitional moves, and just need those to scale up too, and have more and more people get excited and welcome people into the space and try to support them in finding that, first role.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point. I know that what I have seen is obviously we're always hired to find specific talent, right? So it's somewhat on us to find the best people, but at the same time, there's a lot of apprehension in many cases to hiring somebody who's not perfectly qualified, right? And in reality, that ship will sail in a really quick amount of time because there's going to be so few people that are actually qualified per se. That'll be interesting to see. Um, that's obviously another point to think about too, is how many services that are maybe not specifically climate related, but these, educational services that'll have to pop up to help these people make these transitions or to help companies train people from scratch, right? And if there's not enough of these, that'll be interesting to see. Um, awesome, very cool. Well, any final thoughts or things that you wanted to mention to wrap things up here?
I just that I would love to be an advocate to anyone that is interested in doing more climate investing or trying to, find their career in climate, and would like to welcome them to the Cool Climate Collective. I'm sure we'll drop a link so that they can find it. And I'm pretty easy to find on Twitter or other places. So, would be just to throw that out there. If anyone's looking at making that transition, trying to figure out how that they can best support climate solutions, happy to support.
Absolutely. Very good. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, and really excited to see what you guys do over the coming months and years, and probably have you on again in the near future to see, maybe talk about some of the investments or talk about some of your portfolio companies. So thanks so much, Tristan, and we'll see you next time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining on today's episode. I hope you found a lot of value. Hope you enjoyed the conversation with Tristan as much as I did shooting it. Please do share your thoughts with me again. As always, reach out to me via Twitter at Silas Maynor. You can join the Slack channel as well if you're interested in connecting with more individuals in the ClimateTech and CleanTech space. Again, whether you're entering the space or you're a professional looking to share kind of industry knowledge, please do reach out. We welcome everybody to that. We're trying to build a community of like-minded individuals. And also, as mentioned in the beginning of the pod, we want to make mention of our new sponsors, Tigo Energy. So dare to be different with Tigo Energy, the leader in module-level power electronics from Silicon Valley, has revealed the installer-focused energy intelligence residential solar plus battery storage solution. So go to tigoenergy.com/CleanTechies for more information. Tigo, again, just kind of off the cuff here, they're very, very interesting company that's really solving these solutions for residential installers. So definitely reach out to Tigo Energy if you're interested to learn more there. And as always, please do share this podcast with friends that might find this valuable. Obviously, the whole goal here, as always mentioned, is to help other people to realize kind of the benefits and just the things that are happening in the climate tech space. I think a lot of people oftentimes are skeptical of new technology, so I think it's always important for us to share kind of what we're learning and what we see in the space, so that everybody becomes more aware of the positive benefits of the space. So please do share that. Also, coming out the 27th of October is the newsletter. This month is the newsletter, and the topic is focused on sustainable shopping. So very excited for this one, collaborating with Randy on this one again. But yeah, awesome. That's pretty much everything. Also, you can feel free to support the show at buy me a coffee link in the description. But otherwise, thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate the support, and looking forward to seeing you next time on the podcast.